Good evening. Is the microphone working? I just want to make sure you're awake. First of all, for those of you that do not know me, my name is Sheriff Robert Holland. I'm a sheriff here in Macon County, and I'd like to welcome you to Franklin High School, to one of Congressman Meadows' town hall meetings. One of the things I learned today while looking up some things to say about him, which I'm not going to say a whole lot, I'm going to be brief, but one of the things I did learn was he's one of the only congressmen that's actually holding 10 or more of these town hall meetings, so I really appreciate that. I know you're about to applaud the next statement from me, but I actually had a little prepared statement, but I forgot it and my glasses, and so I was not going to put it on. That's okay, I know what some of you drive. Before I introduce Mark, I just want to tell you a couple of things, and I guess I'm being left to be the bad guy, but that's okay. What's going to happen is you all were asked to submit questions when you were coming in. If you didn't submit a question that you would like to be asked, along with your name on that question, please exit out the door out there and go and do that. Otherwise, those that did submit questions, one of Congressman Meadows' staffers will read the questions and recognize the person in the audience that asked that question, and you'll be asked to stand as he answers that question and addresses that question directly to you. The only thing that I ask as the sheriff is, first of all, we appreciate the fact that Congressman Meadows is here and is willing to put himself out here. But we're just asking that everybody remain respectful and courteous. And in the meantime, if somebody doesn't, I have to be the bad guy, and we will politely, with kind regards, one of my officers will escort you out of the building and off of the Franklin High School property. That doesn't mean you can't disagree. And that doesn't mean you can't ask a question that may not be favorable to him. Meadows, after doing some research and seeing how some of these town hall meetings go, I have one question for Ms. Meadows. Is your husband crazy? Okay. Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our Congressman, Mark Meadows.
It is an honor to be here, and I'm sorry that I kept you waiting. We came from a town hall and a plant tour over in Graham County, and I had to pick up a car in Jackson County where I had been at the Walmart this morning after being at the pharmacy in Cashier. So we have had a full day. It is truly an honor to serve you. We are excited about having these town hall meetings. There's been a whole lot in the press about town hall meetings and what they should be and what they shouldn't be. And I can tell you what they should be. They should be about hearing the voice of all of you that have come. And so regardless of where you are with your opinion, I want to hear from you. That's why we asked you to fill out those questions. Some people say, well, you asked me to fill out the questions so you can only pick the ones that you want to answer. I wish that were the case, but I want to hear from you. And I'm here to tell you that our country is in great need of hearing from its people. We must continue to make sure that we're vocal and that your voice is heard. And I can tell you that in our office, we take that very seriously. We've got one of the greatest staffs that you could ever imagine. They have a heart for serving you. They want to hear from you. I'll share a few other stories later on as some of the questions may prompt that. But we just passed, about 10 days ago, we passed 20,000 emails and phone calls where we responded in letter in the first 7.5 months, 20,000 inquiries. When we do that, it's not just that we're responding, because all of those, as you well imagine, may not be positive. Some of those are very direct and to the point, I think is the best way to put that. But I shared a story about being on a phone call earlier this morning. I shared about being on a phone call with a reporter one particular morning. And as we were on that phone call, there was an important vote that was coming up. Later that morning, she goes, "Well, how are you going to vote?" I said, "Well, I'm not sure." She goes, "Oh, well, you haven't made up your mind yet." And I said, "No, I haven't. I'm waiting, to see how I should vote." And so while I was still on the phone with that reporter, the bell goes off, and when you're in the office, the bell goes off, and you've got 15 minutes to make it over to the Capitol to vote. And so it went off, and I said, "I'm going to have to, terminate this interview because I've got to go over and vote." And she says, "Well, how are you going to vote?" And I said, "Well, I still don't know." And she goes, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, I'm going out into the other office. They are counting the number of phone calls and emails that we've had on this particular issue, both pro and con. And we're going to vote the way that the people back home said to vote. And that's the way the government is going to be." And so I just want to say thank you for giving us that honor. We, as you know, we've got some severe financial dilemmas that we've got to deal with. We have Obamacare that is about to be implemented, and the promises that Obamacare made are not really what's happening when it comes to what was in the bill. And I know that we had to read the bill after we passed the bill to figure out what was in the bill. But now that we're reading it, we're understanding that it doesn't do what it was promised to do. Because really what we were told early on is that it would lower rates for everybody, right? We would get cheaper health care, we would get lower insurance. Well, we're finding that actually the opposite is happening. We also were told that everyone would have health care and health insurance. But yet with this implementation, we're finding that still 31 million people will be without health care. And so when it's sold as doing something that it would have a cap, that your out-of-pocket expenses would be capped, we know that most recently that that's not going to be done. And when we decide that we're not going to make employers do something and we delay an employer mandate without delaying the individual mandate, I don't think that's fair. I think we need to make sure that it's ready and it's fair to everybody before anything like that happens. How about you? So instead of spending a whole lot of time, I want to get really to the questions that you might have. And so I believe that once we have the questions, we'll be able to cover a variety of the topics. And if by chance there's something that I want to share with you that's not in those questions, I'll be glad to throw it in as a side comment. But I want to say this. When you were born in this country, or you came to this country, you didn't come as a Republican or a Democrat or unaffiliated. You came as an American. And it's going to take Americans speaking up to return their country back to a representative form of government that truly is accountable to the people. You know, Congress's approval rating is at an 8. A cockroach is at a 9. So that shows you relatively where we are. So hopefully we'll start to change that. The only way that you change that is when you listen to the people. And so thank you so much for being here tonight and for taking time. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask Beverly if you want to start reading the first question, and we'll go from there. Since I'm going to come down, if y'all, if that's all right. That way I can feel like I'm a little bit closer, and we work that way. So the first question.
Okay, when I call your name, please stand up, and then I will read your question to Congressman Meadows. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Alan Coates. Benghazi, the fact that requests for backup has become a forgotten item. Not only was backup refused, but support was taken away. Why are these important issues not important enough to question?
Okay. When we look at Benghazi, I thank you, and you can sit down, but we appreciate your question. When you look at Benghazi, it's not really about politics, it's about people. We have 4 Americans that died, and quite frankly, we need to hold our government accountable and those that are accountable, because we can't allow that to happen again. I mean, we just can't. I'm on oversight and government reform, and as we looked at Benghazi, we're continuing to go and look into that particular issue as we're doing that. I can tell you that we're continuing to ask for witnesses. We've talked to generals and a number of different folks from a Benghazi point of view. What we do know is that it did not start because of a video. We do know that. We also know that the security situation was known at that point. We had enough intelligence at that point that almost daily there were things happening in Benghazi before the attacks on September 11th. Now, I'm not talking about just minor things. I'm talking about kidnappings. I'm talking about rocket-propelled grenades. I'm talking about, unbelievable terrorist activity that was happening each and every day, and yet we somehow act like we were surprised that something was going to happen at a constant. We have the greatest military in the world. We have men and women who serve our country well. And to think that they would not have come in, because the code for the military is to make sure that you take care of it, that you don't leave anybody behind. I was talking to a military guy before. He says, I have always believed that if I got in trouble, that my buddy would be there. What Benghazi has done is undermined that says that, when you're in harm's way, we need to make sure that we come back. I can tell you there's still committed men and women in the military. What we've done is we've given a false answer to save those men's lives. I mean, truly. I looked in the face of some of the family members who had lost loved ones. And our commitment, my commitment, and many on the committee's commitment is that we will not stop until we get to the bottom of it and hold people accountable. And we could have been there. We said, well, we didn't know when it was going to end, and so we didn't send anybody. Well, the fact that it ended a few hours later, it could have still been going on today. When are you going to make a decision to go and rescue somebody? You make the decision the minute that it happens. You send them in, you rescue them. We've got the finest military in the world, and that's what we need to do. I do think that you're starting to see a change. Because of what happened in Benghazi, you saw all the embassies get closed down. They're trying to take more precautions. There are a group of people out there, guys, that hate America. They hate the American way, and we need to understand that. And we need to be protective of those that are there. And I thank you for your question. We will get to the bottom of it, and we're continuing to work on Benghazi. Daryl Issa, the Chairman Issa, has said that he's committed, and I'm planning to work with him on that. But thank you. Next question.
Okay, Thomas Young, please stand. Here's the question. Community block grants have been cut to a point where our Department of Aging can no longer provide to meet the needs of our elderly citizens. Is there a plan to increase funding?
It really depends. Thank you for your question. When we look at some of the funding that we have for agency, and I assume that you're talking about federal funding there and not state funding, or was it more state community block grants?
I assume it's federal funding distributed by the states.
Right, okay. And you're talking about the cuts from sequestration. Okay, you can do a clarifying, instead of an opinion, you can do a clarifying question. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right. There was an opinion coming there, wasn't there? That's okay. But you can come up afterwards, it'll be fine. I'll be glad to hear your opinion.
Well, it's not so much an opinion.
Okay.
Sequestering was Congress's fault. So to blame sequestering is not accurate.
Okay. Sequester actually was Congress giving authority to a group of a super committee, of which I was not crazy about originally, to come up with and say, we want you to find a deal to be able to cut on both sides on those programs that we don't want. And so when they said, well, they went to the president and they said, you know, we've got this thing that if we never, you know, it was never supposed to be implemented from a sequestration standpoint. And so they said this idea is here. It got signed into law. The president signed it, and now it is law, and it continues to be law. And here's two things I would say about sequestration. Do I see those monies coming back? The answer to that is no. I do not see those monies coming back. Do I see the ability to perhaps provide for some of the real needs in terms of block grants? Perhaps. One of the things that we have been trying to work with is allowing the administration to reprioritize and reprogram some of those monies. And let me tell you the reason why that is. That we do not have a taxing problem, we have a management problem. And the management problem is that we are afraid to make tough decisions, but we're also afraid to hold people accountable. And I'll give you two prime examples. One is we spend over $200 billion in duplicative services. That means one agency doing predominantly the same thing that the other agency is doing. So if we could cut that, and if the administration was willing to say, let's just cut those programs out, we could free up $200 billion and we could provide some of that back. So that's one area that I would say is get rid of the duplicate programs, because they're really, you got one agency that they say, well, I do it better than your agency, and they don't do it. The second part of that is, it comes from an accounting. I was in a hearing the other day with the GAO, and we spent, last fiscal year, we spent $107 billion, and we don't know where it went. Now, we don't know where it went. 107, you can Google it, and you can find out, because I had to actually ask the question again. I said, excuse me, are you saying that it was last year? Because I was figuring maybe it was over 20 years. When we start to look at that, eventually 200 billion and 107 billion, eventually it adds up to real money, guys. I mean, I'm telling you. And so what we have got to find out is how that we become better managers of that, to allow for the real needs. Do we have real needs out there, and does government have a role? Without a doubt. But we also need to understand is that we've got the inspector generals. Every department has inspector generals, which is supposed to be part of their department. They're a source that can come in and actually make recommendations. They have $69 billion worth of recommendations. If we would just implement them, then we would save annually. Sequestration, only cut about $80 billion a year. If we just implemented what we know would save us money, we could bring it back, and we would actually start to manage it better. And so, do I see us going the other way on sequestration and adding it back? The answer to that is no. Do I think we could get it back if we started to manage it? And am I willing to work in a very bipartisan way to do that? The answer to that is yes. It is a great question. All right.
Okay, this next question is from Reva Phillips. What, other than improving border security, do you support in immigration reform?
Okay, we've got three things that we need to look at. One is border security, and I've been very vocal about that if we don't have border security, we will end up with the same problem again in 15 years. We need to make sure that we have border security. I am not for amnesty, and that's one of the things that some people. I will not get the same amount of applause across this district when I say that. All right, but thank you. But I also believe that what we need to do, in answer to your question, we need to fix the normal immigration process. Part of the reason why we have a problem is because it can take 10 to 13 years. I talked to one person from Canada, they had to hire 2 attorneys, and they were just wanting to become a citizen and come through the legal process, and it's so laborious that we can't make it work. And so I believe that if we start to fix it, those who want to become citizens do that. Do I believe that there should be a special place in line? The answer to that is no. And I give this example. If you're in line at Ingalls out there and you're going to go there and there's a line of 10 people that you're waiting to check out, is it really fair that somebody comes up with their cart while you've been waiting in line and goes and checks out in front of you while you've been waiting in line, those 9 people? Would it be fair? Well, we can see that obviously there. So the reason why we start to look at this differently is because when we look at immigration, we think of our neighbors and our friends. And truly, a lot of these undocumented workers, many of them have become part of our families and our friends. And we've got to find a way to make sure that they can come out from underneath the shadows. I've been for a guest worker program that does not take American jobs. The Farm Bureaus came up with a 7-point plan that literally worked with the employment security commissions across the state is what they would recommend, and said, you know, if there is a need for guest workers, we can do this and we can put them there. But we also need to make sure that whatever we have works from a government standpoint. How many of you know that we could have, there is no quota, there's no limit on H-2A visas right now, which are agricultural visas, there's no limit. So a few of you know that. So literally we can have as many guest workers under the H-2A visa program right now because there's not a quota on that. But yet what happens is they don't use it. Because it is like so many things in the government, it becomes so regulated and so laborious that they don't fill it out, that they go and bypass it, and we have undocumented workers working in many of the trades that are out there. So what I would be for is a guest worker program that is not steeped in regulation, securing the borders, making sure that we fix our normal immigration process, and really those 3 pillars. I'm not for the Senate bill. You know, if that's what you're asking, I'm not for the Senate bill. When it gets so big like that, you have to put so much stuff in there to get the approval that it's your little thing to get your vote. And before long, we've got all this stuff in there that really doesn't deal with the problem. And so I think we take it on a piecemeal basis. I'm hopeful that we do that. We need to address the problem, and I'm committed to do that. But thank you for your question.
And the next question is from Hazel Potts. How can land that we've taken off the map and sold without property owner's permission be justified?
Land that is taken off the map and sold without, share with me a little bit.
I know all of you well.
Yes, you do.
I've known all of you many years as well.
Well, and how can we take it off and sell it without your permission? Or take
Well, I have no idea. I hired a lawyer to investigate it, but the windup was, that lawyer was in cahoots with this other lawyer that put my property on the map without my permission.
Well,
It
I
happened in Highland, and my property was across the street from the veranda. You know where the veranda is?
oh, I do. I know where your property
And
is
there's
too.
houses built on it. And I have another lot that wasn't taken off the map, and I have no idea why they didn't take it, because it adjoins the veranda, and it is lakefront property.
Oh, I've got that one. That was the one that came coming. But this is a serious thing. What we've got to do. I tell you what we'll do, and even though that may be more of a county and a state issue, if you'll make sure that you get with one of our staffs, we'll work with them to look at that, because anytime that we have a taking, and I'm going to segue that, anytime that you lose property without proper compensation, whether it be under this scenario or whether it's under the government taking it, it's not the proper thing to do, and we know that it's a constitutional protection that we have. And so I will be glad to look in it. It's wrong that it happened to you, and there's a card right there, coming right there to you. And then we will follow up, and I promise that we'll get back to you. But thank you so much. Thank you. Good to see you, Red.
Okay, this next question is from James Sanders. When are you folks in Washington going to stand up to the Democrats?
Well, some would say I've been standing up a bit too much already. I think what it is if we ask both Democrats and Republicans to put the interests of the people they serve first and foremost every single time, things will work out. I want to share with you, because it's about putting people, and I want to share a little bit about our staff, because that story, it reminds me of something that just happened. If you'll remember recently with Obamacare, the administration came out with a ruling that said that congressional staff are going to be exempt and they're going to get a subsidy. How many of you remember that? I figured a few of you might. But let me tell you what our staff did. Because I have preached to them that the rules in Washington, D.C. need to be the same rules that we have on Main Street. And so they have gotten together and they have all agreed, and this is not an insignificant amount of money, because when you start talking about subsidies, you're talking about a couple of $100 or more a month. So you're talking about between $2,000 and $3,000 a year. And these are folks that quite frankly, with the cost of living in Washington, D.C., have a very difficult time just making ends meet. They room up with other folks. But our complete staff, without any exceptions, said that we are willing to forego that to make sure that we don't live a double standard, that the same standard on Main Street is the same standard in Washington, D.C. That's what we need to do. I can be accountable for our office, but that's what we need to do in Washington, D.C. I can tell you, the people that are on staff, they want to serve you too. We had somebody that came in and said, there was an area where somebody was asking for something and we were going out of our way to try to get it solved. And one of the other staffers said, you know what, you're taking on this too personally. You're really just taking it too much to heart, and you shouldn't be. And our staff said, let me just tell you, we want to treat everybody as if we're working for our brother or our sister or our mom or dad. And when you take it on, we start to make phone calls that normally don't get made. We've had a number of successes with the VA, and so what we're making sure of is those that are helping us out, is we call them to thank them and say thank you so much, and make exceptions and make sure that they're encouraged in doing, because there's a lot of great public servants that work in the government. Now, there's fewer in the IRS than most others, but we really need to do that. But thank you for your question.
Okay, this next question is from Kiki Henry. What about the rumor that Congress and federal workers are going to be exempted from Obamacare?
It wasn't a rumor. No, but it does highlight, and I'll make a real quick comment. There is another thing that really government employees should have to do, is that if government employees, staff employees, don't own property and they don't pay their federal taxes, they can't have their wages garnished like you and I. And that's not right. We again need to have the same standard, and so we're identifying those things. Many of you know that I put forth a bill to look at bonuses, because we were paying insane amounts of bonuses. How many of you know Mr. Spock on the IRS parody video? Did you guys see Mr. Spock, you know? Well, Mr. Spock is a guy that honestly, there he was holding a conference, and they were spending $4.1 million for this conference. They had $1,500 suites. They had unbelievable stuff that, quite frankly, you don't even see in the private sector. And under questioning, I said, well, how sure are you that this, I read the report and it said that they couldn't even tell what the real cost. Now, this is the IRS. They couldn't even tell the real cost of that conference because they didn't have the receipts. Now, it's the IRS, guys. If you didn't have the receipts. And so basically what he was saying, you just need to trust me. So the next time you file your tax return, just tell them. They just need to trust you, okay? But when we look at this, so I said, well, could the conference have cost $5 million? And he said, yeah, it could have cost $5 million. I said, well, could it have cost $6 million? And he says, well, possibly, but I don't think so. Now, here is a gentleman that starred as Star Trek, Mr. Spock, and that we paid substantial dollars for this video. And he got a bonus. He got a bonus that year for $31,000. That's on top of a salary of over $170,000. So when you start to look at it, the bonuses we pay some of our senior executives is not right. And we're doing a pay freeze in other areas. And so we've passed legislation that says that we need to make sure that it's on a performance basis that can be no more than 5% of a base salary, and that we need to rein it back in. Lois Lerner, you know, she pleaded the fifth. $110,000 worth of bonuses over the last 5 years. $110,000. And so, guys, let me just tell you, you think that Washington is broke? Well, it's broken figuratively and now financially because of the kind of things that we do. It just doesn't, you wouldn't do it in your home. Why are we doing it in Washington, D.C.? And it's time to stop.
Okay, this next question is from Dan Cowell. Are you fighting for Asheville as the state government has taken a water system, including land?
Not familiar. There's a real battle going on with regards to the water system over in Asheville in terms of who owns it, who has jurisdiction. Is it Hendersonville? Is it the county? Is it the city? And I can tell you that really that's become more of a state issue than it is a federal issue. There's been a couple of folks that have asked me to weigh in on that. And really what I've tried to do is take care of the federal side of things and allow the state representatives, but obviously Mr. Moffitt is taking a lead there, Mr. McGrady is taking a lead, some of the others. It gets down to, anytime that you have a taking without compensation, it's not right. And so we need to make sure that we have that standard. I say that being trying to make sure that I don't weigh in and tell the governor or the state legislature what they should be doing. Not that they would listen necessarily from somebody from Western North Carolina, but I just we just need to have a set of standards. And I give this example. Raise your hand if you were in the military. Wow. Okay. Thank you so much for your service. There has to be a set of rules. And any of you that have served in the military had a standard of rules, of guidelines, and you had a commander, and you had those rules, and you had to abide by those rules. If we don't have a set of rules to abide by that are unwavering, where our yeses are yes and our noes are no, then what we're going to do is have problems like we would have in the military if we didn't have those standards, and the same holds true with our religious freedoms, with our constitutional rights and privileges, and we need to make sure that we're there with that. But thanks for bringing it up. Next question.
Okay, this is from Jenny Armark. It has been since 2005 since we've had a true budget. Can we forget continuing resolutions and get a true zero-based balanced budget?
Jenny and I, we talked about this. I certainly hope so. We have been one that has been pushing for zero-based budgeting, also for making sure that we're under regular order. And by regular order, what that is there's 12 appropriations bills that come out. So with agencies, so a particular agency gets appropriated each and every time. And so as the House would pass those appropriations bills, they go, the Senate works on their side, and hopefully comes together and gets an agreement. What we have seen, as Jenny has pointed out, is at least for the last 4 years, we've gone under what they call a continuing resolution, which assumes the same level of spending that you've had in previous years with certain limitations. It is more of a broad brush approach. It doesn't allow you to say, gosh, you're doing things extremely well here, so we're going to fund this better. You're really big. Again, it gets back to the management question that we were talking about earlier. And we've got to get back to regular order. I do not see that happening on September 30th of this year. We passed 4 out of the 12 appropriations bills over the summer. That still leaves 8 to be done. I don't see that happening in the next 40 days. Even if we were back, I don't see it working through committee that. But there is a real push to get back to that. Because what happens is when you start to have to justify whether you're spending money, it really makes you look at it. How many of you can guess what quarter of the fiscal year most of the spending gets done in? Number 4, yeah. Now, why is that a surprise? Because they actually budget and they say, well, guys, if we've got anything left over in this 4th quarter, let's spend it. And why do they spend it? Because there's no incentive for them to keep it back. If they spend it, they'll get the same level next time. If they don't spend it, what's the assumption? Well, they don't need it, so let's cut it. So we see unbelievable 4th quarter spending across every agency, and it's time that we give some incentives for those that operate efficiently, and really some punishment for those that don't. And it's time that we do that.
Okay, this next question is from Albert Angel. What is your position on Congress, senators, the White House, et al. Enjoying privileges the average citizen does not? For example, exceptions from Obamacare, school loans for family members, being paid by taxpayers. They have much higher incomes than most U.S. taxpayers.
We have a reoccurring theme here, I think. And so as we start to look at this, the one deal about the kids and getting the forgiveness of those loans, that's not accurate. I know that that's all over the internet, and it's believed. And I know you can believe everything that's on the internet. But that's one that you can't. But there are a lot of benefits that truly that some get in Washington, D.C. I can tell you that it is starting to really come down in a big way. Those bonuses are one area that I think that we need to really cut back on. The unlimited travel that a lot of these conferences we've really started, and actually the administration has started to cut back on those. But again, we have to spend money as if it's not our money, but it's your money. Oh, it is your money. I forgot. Okay. Yeah, it is your money. And so what happens is we need to really spend it as if it's our own money that we're spending. And what happens is we've started talking in such large numbers that we don't think anything. When $50 million is a rounding error, we got a real problem. And that's really where we have it. We can sit there and fight. I know that there's been a number of times that I've driven back and forth from Washington, D.C. because the flight in was very expensive, over $1,000. I said, well, I wouldn't do that personally, so I'm not going to spend taxpayers' dollars to do that. But I'm sitting there fighting over that, and we're giving out $50 billion to build roads in Afghanistan that, quite frankly, don't hold up under engineering specs. And let me tell you how ridiculous that is. The GDP for Afghanistan is $2 billion a year. We've invested $50 billion in roads and bridges, so 25 times their annual GDP, and many of those bridges, guys, are not up to standards. I mean, they're bridges that will eventually, so we've created jobs, and it's at the expense of taxpayers. And so we've got to start making business-like decisions, and it's enough to make you sick. Sometimes it does make you sick. But again, it's making sure that the standard we have is the same standard that you face, and I'm here to fight for that, even if it costs me personally. Thanks.
Okay, this next question is from Michael Lyons. Congressman Meadows, given that a lot of the DC malarkey happens in committee and without the consent of the bill's author, would you be willing to support steps and measures to protect the sovereignty of the author and the bill as it moves through Congress?
Malarkey. I tell you, there is a lot of malarkey that goes on, and really what it is it takes people to be informed. I can tell you this is the largest town hall meeting that we've had so far, so thank you so much. It takes people getting involved and being willing to look at those issues and highlight them. And highlight them in a kind way. I think most everybody, we have a position in our office that we say that if you come from the district, you get in to see me, and that is the priority. If you come from the state, you get in next. If you're a lobbyist, you're in the back of the line. And so that's the way that we do it in my office. But with that, what happens is a lot of the committees, the power really is in the committees, as was mentioned. And so what happens is a whole lot of that gets done in committee. I will say that there is a real push, as it is with the budget, as it is with most of the bills in Congress, to make sure that they have what we call regular order. That means that you debate the issue back and forth in committee, that you debate it on the House floor, and then you pass it up or down based on their life. But here's the thing with C-SPAN, is that too many speeches get made for the benefit of C-SPAN instead of the benefit of the people back home, and it's time that we start having our rhetoric and our legislation match when it comes out of committee. So I'm for regular order because let me tell you what happens on those committees. If you show up, you get a whole lot of say. And I can tell you I'm on 3 different committees. I'm on total of 7 subcommittees. And so in any given day, I may have 4 to 7 committees. And so you're constantly running from one committee to the other and trying to make sure that you're doing. But if you show up and you work hard, it means even as a freshman, you have a voice. And so that's what we need to continue to do and make sure that it's not there. I think there's a qualifying question or comment.
If a citizen, regular citizen, John Q. citizen, comes up and helps you author a bill from the 11th or wherever it might be, and they're willing to spend their time and dime to go to DC and sit in committee, would you be willing to help establish and reinforce measures to let them sit on those committees and receive those criticisms, given that that is their interest?
Okay, the question is if somebody helped you draft a piece of legislation, could you come and sit in on the committee and be part of it? Actually, you could sit in the audience; those are open as a public forum. In terms of in terms of asking the questions, going back and forth, no, that's not really permitted. But I can tell you what does happen. Many of you have sent me questions that you've wanted asked, and I've asked them. And so I've asked those exact questions. The other thing that I'd like to say is you got a sheriff here, and Sheriff Robbie Holland. One of the bills that we introduced, actually the text of that, the idea of that and everything came from Sheriff Holland and Sheriff Fry in Avery County in our district. It was stuff that we actually put forward. That bill may not end up getting passed, but it does look like the monies that came from that idea, that came from Macon and Avery County in our district, are going to get put into the budget this particular time, and actually an increase in funding, and that's for the Cops in Schools program to make sure that resource officers are in our schools and protect our schools. That came from here. And so, are we open to great ideas? Yes. Are we willing to introduce them? Yes. Can I guarantee that we will get credit? The answer to that is no. And Ronald Reagan said, it's amazing how much you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. And that's what we need to do. And if we do that, we may have legislation that passes. You know, Robbie won't get credit for the funding that comes for the cops in schools, except for the few that are here and the appreciation of me and my staff. But ultimately, he can know that he's done something that made a difference, not only in Western North Carolina, but throughout our country. And so, thank you, Robbie, but thanks for the question. Y'all keep those questions and comments coming.
Okay, this next question is from Ralph Slaughter. Would you please stand? Congressman Meadows, I know that you serve on some very important committees. Can you tell us what they are and what the committees do?
Okay. They don't do as much as they should be doing, let's put it that way, but I've served on 3 different committees. I actually serve on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. We're Benghazi, we've been looking at that. We've been looking at the targeting of conservative groups with the IRS. That's on our committee. We've been looking at the funding of some of these other programs, like you heard with, you've heard about Solyndra and Fast and Furious. That all comes out of that particular committee. There was Fisker Automotive, of which we gave almost $500 million to, so that they could produce an electric car in Finland. I mean, why? I mean, and so when you look at this, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. And so we serve on Oversight and Government Reform. I'm actually on 2 separate subcommittees there. One that deals with government regulations and economic development, which I love. I mean, we go after anything that's too much regulation. The other is government operations, and what that is it deals with the waste. And that's how some of these hearings that we've been hearing recently, that we're continuing to spend money. We have over 600 computer server sites across the country. Now, you would think that computers would get cheaper and servers would get more reasonable, but we've got unbelievable waste in the IT sector, and that comes under all of that. In addition to that, I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I'm on the Africa Subcommittee, which would have international organizations such as the UN and Global Health under that jurisdiction, and the Middle East Subcommittee. So I have been very busy with Egypt and Libya and Syria, and so y'all need to pray for me on those. Those are the things that keep me really up at night. We need to make sure that we stand by our ally, Israel, and that we don't And the last committee that I'm on is actually the one that the Democrats like the best. It's called Transportation and Infrastructure, and it deals with all the transportation and infrastructure needs across the country. It comes through that committee. I'm actually on 3 different subcommittees on that particular one. And so that's really about prioritizing a number of things. Let me tell you what's not fair when you look at one of those, and thank you, Ralph, for the question. We have a federal highway fund that gets funded by taxes on the fuel that you spend. You purchase fuel, a certain amount of the federal taxes, and it's to go in to pay for the federal highways and many of the needs that are there. What I found really disheartening is that 20% of that money goes to mass transit. Well, you say, okay, well, just because we don't have a whole lot of mass transit in Western North Carolina, that doesn't make a big difference. But the majority of that 20% goes to 6 cities, none of which are in North Carolina. Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles. And so just think that you're doing those cities a great service the next time that you're pumping gas, you're helping out their mass transit. But we really need to make sure that it's fair and equitable. And so that's what we're striving to do. Right now we're in the middle of a water resource bill that we're trying to figure out how to best allocate funds for water resources. But 3 different committees, and they do keep you busy. But great question. Thanks, Ryan.
This next question is from Bill Crawford. Do you, Congressman Meadows, support the loss of millions of Head Start positions for American kids by sequestration?
You know, obviously, thank you for your question. Obviously, any time that we have kids at risk that are being hurt, it's not something that you can support. I mean, I read about that particular article, just came out in the last couple of days in both the Wall Street Journal and a couple of others where we're looking at that. It gets back to the question that was earlier. What we need to do is make sure that we start managing those items, and that if we don't manage it, there are going to be unintended consequences of people that get hurt, because what we're having to do is we're having to cut and make ourselves fiscally responsible. I can tell you that the source of money that the American government has is not unlimited. It is a finite sum. Now, we can print it, and if we print it, what will happen is it will create all kinds of other problems with unintended consequences. But in answer to your question, do I support that? No. Do I want to make sure that we give the states, the federal government, the discretion to make sure that we get those that are best needed? I think the answer to that, in fact, I know the answer to that is yes, we need to manage it, and that's what we need to do. Let me go ahead and jump over to one other area that's going to come up here, and I might as well open up this particular area, because when we're starting to talk about food stamps, one of the things that most of us are compassionate, we want to help our neighbor. In fact, in Western North Carolina, if there's a need, I guarantee more than likely you are there with food and help for your neighbors on a consistent basis. I get to tell those stories in Washington, D.C. It's almost uniquely universal across all the 17 counties that I represent. And it speaks to the character of the people that we have. But yet at the same time, what happens is when we look at food stamps, we have to make sure that we are not supplying food stamps to people that, quite frankly, can get out and work. So I am for a work requirement. I am for a work requirement for those that are single with a work, that can get out and work. I want them to work. If they can't find work, then what I would like for them to do is make sure that they get out and they work for a nonprofit. And I don't care if it's a liberal nonprofit or a conservative nonprofit. If they will get out and work, then what happens is that they can be entitled to it. But we have to have a work requirement. The other part of that is I'm not for a qualify for one federal program, get them all. Let me give you a real scenario that happened in one of the states. What would happen is they would go in, they would actually say, and I'll take you and say, okay, you're wanting to qualify. Well, I'm not sure that you qualify for all the programs, but we're going to get you $1 back on your electric, because that's a program that you qualify for, and I can get you $1 back on your electric bill to help compensate for high heating costs. And so when I get you the $1, you automatically qualify for all the other federal programs. That is not... sign you up. We have too many people that are saying sign me up. But when we look at these individual qualifications, that's what they need to be, individual qualifications that meet a particular need, and we can be compassionate about it, and when we do that, that's what I would be in favor of. And as we look at some of the reform, that I don't believe that we have to cut it, we just have to change basically the qualifications to get on it, and make sure that we put value back in work. Thanks.
Okay, this next question is from Bill Crawford. I didn't have one already. Congressman Meadows, what is wrong with spending government money for infrastructure?
What is wrong with spending government money for infrastructure? Well, we know from a constitutional standpoint, there are some things that we need to be spending our money for in terms of infrastructure. But those are defined and highlighted in terms of where we are. Now, what we've gone is way beyond the Constitution. Are you Bill? Who's Bill? Okay, Bill, okay. So I guess you're making the assumption that I think that we shouldn't be spending on infrastructure. But that's not the case. I mean, there are certain things that we do that are outlined that we can spend our money on infrastructure as we start to look at that. But the second part of that is that we've gone way beyond where we do. We think that it's okay to tax everybody else to make sure that we build infrastructure in a particular area that may not be to their benefit. And I don't agree with that. I mean, now, do we all work together? Yes. Do we all need to make sure that we have a great... How many of you traveled on the interstate system? Okay. Most of you, how many of you been speeding? Okay. Robbie? Kenny, you weren't supposed to raise your hand there. But really, when we look at it, there are certain things that we do. But if we do not tackle, and getting back to the infrastructure, if we do not tackle the big problems, if we do not save Medicare, if we do not save Social Security, if we do not tackle those big things, there's not going to be enough money for infrastructure and anything else when you look at the discretionary side of spending. That's why we're starting to see Head Start and a number of these other areas that are starting to get pared down. When you start looking at those dollars, we need to do that. There's two things we can do. We can be good managers of our money. The second part of that is we can grow our economy again where those revenues start to come in. Because when you grow an economy, you actually get an increase in taxes. We've seen that under the Kennedy administration back in the early 60s. We see that under Ronald Reagan. We've seen that over and over. And so that's what we need to do. But I'm not against infrastructure improvement. Quite frankly, we've got a real broadband issue in the West here that we need to look at that will actually hopefully promote jobs. Okay.
This next question is from Christopher Braun. I'm a military retiree, age 64. My wife and I are subsisting on Social Security and military retirement pay. I just learned that at age 65, I must sign up for Medicare Part B or I will lose my TRICARE. This will cost several $100s per month for each of us. What happened to the promise of free health care for military retirees?
Yeah. I want to change one part of your question because it's not free health care, it's earned health care because our veterans serve honorably. I was at a retired military group on Friday, and this particular thing, because I've been working with them on TRICARE and making sure that it's preserved. What happens is anytime that we start to see benefits across the board, we're starting to see those benefits that be sucked out. They're saying they're too rich for you. Even though you fought, you served our country well, you had it. And actually the recruiters, this is what the officers told me, the recruiters would use that as a tool to keep you in and said, listen, if you're here, son, what you're going to do is you're going to get this health care, you're going to be taken care of for life. And many of you that are in the military, you can probably back that up. I've had that story told over and over again. But what we're doing is trying to fold that into Medicare, which I'm opposed to. I've been very vocal on that particular thing. We've got a commitment to our veterans that we need to honor. And that commitment is unflinching. They made a commitment to us. we need to do the same thing and return it. And so I'm very concerned because what we're doing is at $100 and $200 at a time, we're starting to really hurt our seniors. And we're saying, well, guys, they can afford another $40 in premiums. Or no. But when gas prices have gotten to the outlandish place they have, and if you're on a fixed income, it makes a big difference. You know, when you're filling up your tank and you're spending an extra $40 or $50 to fill it up, what you do is you either make a decision to fill it up and go on the trip and maybe do without back at home, or you say, I'm going to stay home, I'm not going to fill it up, you know, and that's not the American way, and we can do better than that. And I'm here to fight with you on that. If you would let us know your particular situation, we'll be glad to follow up on that, though. Thank you. All right, next.
This next question is from Jim Mueller. Tell us about the proposed piece of legislation you're trying to get passed right now.
Okay.
You already covered that.
Well, I covered one of them. We have a couple of different, and nice beard. I don't know if your wife likes it or not, but nice beard.
You went on vacation.
Oh, you went on vacation. Okay.
But I also wanted to, since you kind of answered that one, how are we putting so many people in home disabled when they're fairly young and a bunch of welfare by calling them disabled?
You know, I don't know the answer to that last question. I do know that we do have a severe problem with the Social Security disability function because it is set to go bankrupt in the year 2016. 2016, guys. I mean, we're looking at just a few years that we've got to act to work on that. And again, if disability is one of those things that, you know, if you deserve it and earn it, then you should get it, and then if you don't, you shouldn't. And I think we can all agree on that, but we can all probably think of people that have qualified that are maybe on it that shouldn't be on it too. I mean, and I won't ask for a raise of hands, but we need to make sure that we hold the qualification. And that's what happens a lot of times with government programs. They get really hard to manage when they get so big. You know, when we get big programs, they get harder. I mean, from an education standpoint, the best education policy comes from local teachers with local superintendents and local principals. That's the best policy. I see Ray Trine over here, and his wife has been involved in education. And when you look at that, you know, when you start to try to make decisions from far off, you miss it. You really miss it. And so we've got to do that. We've got a number of pieces of legislation that we're hopeful that makes it through. One that we've been working on foreign affairs are used for political purposes to say we're doing something. They need to have real results. And so we're working on some legislation in foreign affairs on that as well. Thanks.
Okay, these next two questions from two separate people are very closely aligned, so I'm just going to call both your names. Corey Duvall and Joan Mackey. Today's job report release showed that while the nation's unemployment rate is going down, North Carolina's is going up. Do you campaign on bringing jobs to Western North Carolina in the 11th district? Where are the jobs?
Okay. Great question, and it's something that we're actually working very hard to make sure that we do. And I did campaign on doing jobs, and we've got to do 3 or 4 things. I can tell you that we have had some increases in terms of GE and a number of others that have actually expanded their facilities here in Western North Carolina. We're meeting on a regular basis with a number of folks. And the great thing about the people in terms of the corporate world, they know that North Carolina is a hard-working state. They also know that they're willing to be devoted. And so we're seeing some help there. There's 2 things that we've put forth. We put forth, really, I was a co-sponsor of it, but it deals with regulation. It's called the REINS Act. It's really to bring back in some of that regulation. We know that for each 5% reduction in regulation, there is a $1.2 million job growth. Get that, 5% in terms of reduction in regulations, we can create 1.2 million jobs. And so we put forth that legislation. We're encouraging our Senate counterparts to take that up and do with regulations. But let me just say this. Any federal program that gets involved becomes very difficult to get rid of, even if it's under a pilot program, guys. I mean, I am just appalled at where we are with regards to some of these programs that we know they're not working. I'll give you a case in point. We've got security at ports. We had a pilot program that was supposed to handle this secure area to be against terrorists, so that they could make sure that they would have these cards that they could put in that were biometric cards, and that only the people that are supposed to be. Well, it's not working. And the reason it's not working is that they found out that there's a whole lot of salt water around those ports. Now, who would have thought of that before we went into the pilot program? I mean, you would have thought, somebody would have thought about that. But yet, instead of doing away with the program, we continue to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to the tune of $300 million additional after we figured out that it probably won't work. Now, let me ask you this. If you've got a biometric card, and you're going to get into the port, and you're a terrorist, and we know that you're not. Well, at least we think you're not. Okay, you're not. Okay. Well, she's not. We're going to take her word for it. Okay, all right. So she's not a terrorist, but she's got this biometric card. All right, it doesn't have to be attached to you. So what do you do with a biometric card if you really want to get into the port? I would sell it. You know, so you sell the so it's not even something that is physically attached to the person, and yet it has these biometrics that we're supposed to be able, but we're counting on your credibility to make sure that it doesn't get lost or stolen or sold. Now, I don't know about you, but there are a lot of terrorists out there that do not have the same ethics that we would have when it comes to those kind of things. So, I mean, it is those kind of things that we have to work on. I can tell you from a job standpoint, my heart breaks for those that are unemployed. And there is not a day that goes by that I am not working to reduce regulations, to try to modify our tax code. I'm hopeful. I don't sit on the Ways and Means Committee. That's where tax policy comes out of. But I've been in 4 other meetings that have been an ad hoc meeting that we just said those people that are interested in this can come and work in a working group. I've been involved in it because I know that what happens if we address that, we will not only have people in Western North Carolina working again, but we'll have people across this country working again. And so I'm committed to do that. Is it where it needs to be? The answer to that is no. And I'm continuing to fight and have been vocal on that particular issue, even on the House floor. But thanks for the question.
This next question is from Panthea Crawford. In a number of states, farmers have faced fines or criminal charges for selling directly to consumers. What is your commitment to protecting the rights of citizens to buy directly from local farmers at farmers markets on the farm?
All right. I hear an amen, a few amens. Really, honestly, this is something that does get bipartisan support because if you look at local foods grown locally, that is something that does get pretty good bipartisan support. What we have gone is in the farming industry in particular, not in Western North Carolina, but across this country, is the huge corporate farms, where we're really undermining the small farmer that really made not only a rich culture and tradition in our nation, but really made us prosperous. People might be surprised to know that our #1 economic engine in Western North Carolina is agriculture. You would think it would be tourism or housing or something else, but it's actually agriculture. And so the ability for them to be able to sell on the roadside or at a farmer's market is something that needs to be protected, because if not, you end up with just a small few gardens that are in backyards, and then we start to try to regulate that as well. And again, it gets back to the regulation. You take a good premise, you regulate it, and you go too far. And so I'm committed to make sure that we preserve that. Thank you for your question.
This next question is from Raymond Baer. tax on Social Security was enacted about 1993. The tax threshold is $32,000. It has never been raised. If the threshold was raised by the inflation rate, it would be about $50,000. What do you intend to do about that?
That gets to the core of what we're having to deal with an aging population. We've got two factors going on. We know that Social Security is in trouble. And so there's going to be constant pressure to do what? To cut, to go the other way. And even with some of the recommendations that some in my party have made in terms of what they think is a good idea, I've got a mom who is on Social Security and Medicare. And when we look at that, when we see the overall impact of how the dollar is really buying less and going, your check has not gone up really commensurate, and some of them haven't gone up at all, from a CPI standpoint. But your check really hasn't come up to keep up with just the inflation that we see in food and gas. And go ahead.
What I'm really talking about is raising that threshold.
So you don't get taxed on it.
Taxing Social Security.
I don't see there being the intestinal fortitude in Congress among many of those to raise that threshold, because what that will do is bring it to a point where it reduces tax revenues, and what they will say is that's going to have a negative CBO score, which is a Congressional Budget Office, and so when it has that score, everybody scurries away from it to say that it's going to exacerbate the problem. And I wish I could, I'm always going to shoot straight with you. I wish I could sit here in front of you and say that's something that's going to be changed. It's not even really being talked about on a real basis, Democrat or Republican right now. And I don't see there being a whole lot of impetus behind that to get that done. And I wish it were different. The real key that we've got to do is get our economy going again, where hopefully what we can do is start to address things. Again, when you have a finite amount of money, you start to squeeze it down, you look for it everywhere. It's maybe there, it's maybe in TRICARE, it may be in Head Start, it could be all over. And what happens is we've got to get it where, once again, we're a prosperous nation.
Seek to find one listening. Studying the Argentine homosexual.
I am not for the comprehensive program that we have coming out of the Senate. And I disagree with some of my party who are for that, mainly because I don't think that it solves the problem, and it puts the wrong priorities in terms of rewarding illegal activities. And I don't think that we need to be doing that, but thank you for your question. So I'm not against it, and some would say that I'm on the fence and that I'm more on the liberal side of that. Some say I'm more on the conservative side of that, but I think that right there is really where I'm talking about. And it really comes from this district. It comes from talking to every single guy that has people that have worked for them for 20 or 30 years. These people are not making below minimum wage. In fact, I haven't found any that are making less than $9.70, because I ask every time in terms of what they're making. What we really need to do is find a system that works. And they get scared, because I take a lot of tours of plants, and I come in and I'm in a suit. And normally coming behind me are a couple of officers like this, and so I come walking through, and you get these very nervous looks from some of the guys that are working there, and that's unfortunate, and we could do a better job than that. But thank you for your question.
We've had several questions tonight on Obamacare. We'll take one more.
Sure.
This is from Kim Vetter. Will you support
My terrorist.
continuing resolution that funds the government but defunds Obamacare?
Yeah. Many of you probably know that I've taken some heat on my particular position on this area. with regards to Obamacare, I look at Obamacare as not being ready for prime time and not being fair. And those two things are a great concern to me. Now, you can disagree on a number of things, but we do have to find a way to handle pre-existing conditions. And if we can find a way to do that, I am all for it. The legislation that we have before us today is not there. And I have led a letter that I have, I think 78 or 79 of my colleagues on the letter, that is basically said that we should not fund Obamacare, and I'm firm on that. When you look at it, we were told that we had to pass it before we could read it to find out what was in it. And I'm telling you now that we're reading it and we're finding out what's in it, and we really don't like what we're seeing, because we were supposed to have rates that were going to be lower, and the rates are not lower, guys. And I'm here to tell you that if I have gone to business after business after business, and the rates are not lower. You're starting to see those filmed, across Oregon, Indiana, Georgia, where their rates are going through the roof because they're publishing them. We have not published our rates here, but I have talked to insurance providers here, and if you're healthy and you're in your 30s and 40s, get ready, because the bill that you're about to get will be much greater than what you're paying now or could pay now. The other thing is, there was a false number that if we passed this bill, we would be able to insure everybody and give everybody affordable health care. What we know now is that actually there will still be 31 million people without health insurance. Now, there's only 50 million now. So we're going to take and give subsidies to 12.1 million people, subsidies or free health care. And then we're going to force the other 7 million to pay for insurance that is more expensive than what they have right now. And I can tell you, there's story after story that if you want to tell me your stories, I will be glad to hear them. I've got enough of those that I can share real life, true stories each and every day where it's happening. We need to make sure that it's ready for prime time. I'm all for making sure that pre-existing conditions get covered. But at this point, it's not fair that we have an employer mandate that doesn't get implemented, but yet we're forcing individuals to pay it. It's counterintuitive. It is not what the whole bill was about. And yet we're still going to go forward. And so I've been very vocal. I'm very firm on that particular item. And I do have a number of colleagues with me. I have a number that are not. And the fight will happen here in the next 5 to 6 weeks. And so if y'all would keep me in your thoughts and prayers as that happens. Thanks. I'm going to go ahead and open it up just briefly because I know that what happens there, and the hands go up, that anytime I ask a question, there are a number of you who say, I don't agree with that, and you're entitled to your opinion. And what I would ask you to do is just ask a question. This is not time to give opinions as much as it is you can ask pointed questions, and I would encourage you to do that. So we've got time for 4 or 5 questions before we do, is that correct? 4 or 5 questions before we do that. And I'll go ahead and come back here first because I saw your hand go up first, which normally means that it's the toughest question, but I'll go ahead and go to you first.
Congressman, I do appreciate you coming, doing these town hall meetings. Unfortunately, I'm from Jackson County, and I had to come to Macon County because you're holding your Jackson County town hall meeting in Cherokee, which I'd say that serves about 1 to 2% of Jackson County's population. But again, I do appreciate this opportunity. Why are you against a health care program? And again, this will be the 41st time in Congress that they will try to repeal Obamacare. Even though it's been passed by the Supreme Court, it is the law of the land right now.
Right.
All right, why are you against a program, please allow this, that will allow more than 6.6 million additional young adults from the age of 19 to 26 years old to have access to health care by being allowed to remain on their parents' insurance plan. Why are you against protecting consumers nationwide? Starting in 2014, Obamacare prevents insurance companies from charging higher premiums, limiting benefits, or denying coverage to those patients.
Hold on, hear him out, guys. Hear him out.
Okay.
Okay.
One more point. There's several points I'd like to make. I want to honor the fact I don't want to.
No, and
my third point, if you'll hear me out. Beginning October 1st, 2013, millions of Americans will be able to shop for health insurance and compare plans through health insurance exchanges. Approximately 9 million Americans are projected to gain coverage through the exchange in 2014, and by 2022, 25 million will have insurance.
okay, all right. It gets back, and I'll answer 3 different things in the way, but I appreciate your comments. And so, let me get to the town halls. I will be holding, this time that I'm back, 10 town halls, which are 10 more than were held in the last 2 years. There were 10 more than were held. But I also will say this, that once we're done here, we will have had town halls or open forums where I take questions. And I can tell you, most members of Congress don't like to do this. Is it comfortable for you to have a difference of opinion and us talk about this and you say, no, it's not comfortable. But at the same time, I'm your representative and I'm here to hear all 749,000 opinions that are out there. And I will say this, is once we're done, we will have had a town hall in every single county that I represent. 17 from when I took office. All right? All 17. And so I'm sorry that you had to travel, but I appreciate you being here. Now, the other part is that when you talk about some of those statistics with Obamacare, I'm not against, and I thought I made that clear, I'm not against making sure that people have coverage. I'm not against that. But I am against the unintended consequences. One of the things that you said there was the fact that rates would be cheaper.
I didn't say it.
Okay, you said they would be able to buy insurance cheaper?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, well, I must have misheard you. Okay, so let's look at this, is the people staying on their insurance, their parents' insurance. That becomes something that the private sector can do without doing it, and we could legislate it, and that may be something that we want to do. That's an easy risk, because we're managing the process where the expenditures are going to benefit families and not benefiting truly things that might be nice to know. But you know, when you pay for a study on the effects of alcohol and Chinese prostitutes, I fail to see how that is any good for any of us. So,
Okay, this next question is from Fred Berger, excuse me. How do you propose to rebuild our crumbling bridges, roads, and airports? Why not a jobs bill?
Well, we've had a jobs bill. It was called the stimulus, and really what happened is that we see that it didn't do much. And really what happens, and I can tell you, I've been in the real estate business, and we built roads and we built bridges. And why did we build those roads and bridges? It's so that we could sell the property that those roads and bridges got to. You know, when we start putting an emphasis so much on that, what happens is we take our eye off the ball in terms of what really creates jobs. See, a lot of people would say, well, gosh, if you just do more road projects, you're going to have all these jobs. Well, that kind of investment, while very important, getting infrastructure is very important, it does not create lasting jobs. Because what happens is when a private company has to invest in something, what do they expect? A return. They expect a return. So you invest, you get a return, and you invest it again to make another return. When the government invests in something, they don't necessarily look for a return, do they? they said, well, we're going to do that, and we're going to do it, and we can feel good because we can have that bridge. I know that we have some real needs, but I can tell you I see a lot more needs out there right now, even though we may have a number of bridges that are in disrepair and not up to engineering standards. We have a whole lot more needs, some of which just got mentioned here. Is how do you handle a fixed salary in terms of Social Security benefits and making ends meet. It's not an unlimited supply, but thank you for your question. We need to continue to prioritize and make sure that we only spend those monies where it is. We allocated over $300 million for Amtrak in January. The real needs because of Hurricane Sandy were $30 million. Now, why did we spend 10 times what the damage was? Well, it became just an amount of money that we're going to invest. And I would venture to say most of you have not been on Amtrak recently. And I like Amtrak. I'm a big fan of rail. But at the same time, how many of you got benefits personally from Amtrak? Okay, you got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. All right, thank you.
This next question is from Philip Rogers. An immigration moratorium. Would a temporary 2 to 3 year immigration moratorium give the current overload of immigrants time to assimilate, unemployed Americans time and a chance to find jobs, and the Border Patrol the opportunity to really control the borders, regain control of the borders, and to build a fence?
The question is a great question, if you look at that. The truth of the matter is I don't see us having any kind of a moratorium on immigration. It gets back to the comment that I made earlier in terms of those positions, where I am on those particular positions. And if we fix our broken system, really what we want is we want a working people that are willing to work and go from one class to another class. That's what creates prosperity. Let me just tell you, how many of you really enjoy being poor? Most people don't. I mean, there's one back there that enjoys being poor. All right? And so, but when you look at that, if you enjoy being poor, the greatest motivation for me to get out of poverty was to work hard to make sure that I could provide a better living for my family than I had growing up. And yet we need to do the same thing with our immigrants. I mean, in the rotunda of the Capitol is a picture of a guy that came over on the Mayflower by the name of William Brewster. He has a Bible there. He's opening. He came here as an immigrant. That was my 11th great-grandfather. So when you really look at it, we're all immigrants, of some kind of way. And so a moratorium I don't see working. Really, it's going to take the intestinal fortitude to make the hard decisions to secure a border. A fence won't do it. A fence is not the total answer. I mean, it's part of the answer. But you also know, these reality shows that show now how they're, tunneling under and, they're filling it up. And those are real things. We've got a lot of guys on the Homeland Security Committee, and it's a real problem on how we deal with it. And we need to make sure that we deal with it soon. But I don't see there being a moratorium that would fix it. This is not something that time will fix. It's something that policy will fix, and we've got to set forth the right policies to do that. But thanks for your question.
Okay, this next question is from Jim Gray. President Obama has announced a plan to shut down Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac within 5 years. What do you think was the primary cause of the mortgage industry collapse, and how should the federal government be involved in the future with the home mortgage industry?
Next question. Good question, Jim. It's one that obviously what we saw was a housing boom, that we were making loans and giving out money that we shouldn't have made. And so whenever money gets too cheap and too easy, there's going to be, as I talked about earlier, those unintended consequences. There has to be a mechanism to free up some of our banking institution in terms of allow that credit to flow again, because the pendulum was way over here. We've swung it way over here, where it's way too rigid. We need to bring it back, and anybody who's in that business knows that we've got to bring it back to a point where we start to make loans again. Jim Hersling, who's over the Financial Services Committee, is committed to really working very hard to find a replacement for Freddie and Fannie. One of those might be the private sector, where you actually take a pool of bonds that are secured by mortgages that says, okay, you're going to invest in these bonds, and then if you get some bad ones, you pull those out, and it becomes a pool of that where it's not a federal program, it's more of a private bond mortgage-backed security. A lot of this is way above my pay grade. That's one that I know that could possibly work. But again, it gets back to government created that problem, and now we have to fix it. But hopefully when we fix it, it's not that we repeat the problem. If we learn from our mistakes, that's a good thing. Too many times we don't learn from our mistakes. I know we're starting to get out on a few more questions. I want to be sensitive to you that I'm not boring you to death, and at the same time we've got a few other questions, and then I may throw it out so that if you're just itching to ask a few questions, that you can do that, because that's normally where the colorful questions come from, and I'm open for that as well. But hopefully you'll see that we have not, we believe that if you had questions, we want to make sure they're getting answered. And that's regardless of whether you agree with me or not. I want to make sure that your questions get answered, because that's what America's all about. You expressing your opinion, and hopefully me listening and representing you in a way that makes sense. Go ahead, we'll do a couple of others.
Okay, this next question again deals with immigration. Shirley Chess. The Chamber of Commerce, Agriculture, and many large corporations are for immigration reform. Why are you opposed to this benefit to our economy?
Well, I'm not against immigration reform. In fact, if you'll talk to most of the farmers throughout this district, I've been criticized by some in my own party for the position that I have with regards to immigration reform. I've made it fairly clear here that I'm not for amnesty. I don't think that is immigration reform. I think we have to have immigration reform. When it really gets down to it, I want to make sure that we've got the workers that are out there, many of them that are working in fields and restaurants and other places here, that we allow them to be able to come out. Those 19 to 26-year-olds think that they can do what? Conquer the world. I mean, they don't think they'll get sick. They don't think, and so they're generally healthy. But what I do have a problem with is that what it does is it creates an environment. I went to one worker over in Burke County that was providing health care. There, they have a child that was an employee's child that was 22 years old that had health coverage. All right? But because of this new regulation, the health coverage of the employer was better than the health coverage that they had individually, so they were dropping their individual coverage and quit paying the premium so that they could be covered under the parent's premium, and they were required to do that. Now you say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, what happens is individual responsibility becomes a key thing, and I'm all for individual responsibility, and what we've got to do, again, is put the value back on work. By the time I was 26 years old, I had worked hard. I was in my second home and had been married for 6 years. Now, and we're sitting here talking about, well, wouldn't it be nice? Well, it would have been nice if my parents could have afforded to pay for my insurance. But that didn't happen. Now, I'm a better person because of that. Now, are there circumstances where we can do that? Without a doubt. But when we start to look at it, at what cost is what I would ask you. Is it fair? All right? Is it fair to ask Shirley over here to pay so that a 26-year-old can have insurance? Is that fair? I don't think so. You know, it gets back to that personal responsibility. Am I against that? No. Is there a better way to do it than the bill that we have? I believe there is. The private sector could do that. I think your other third leg of that is that you will see, I forget the statistic that you had there, in 2014. When you started with January of 2014, you have a word there.
Well, the second point was pre-existing conditions, and the third point was that starting in 2014, 9 million Americans are projected to gain coverage through health care exchange.
Okay. And actually it's better than that. 12.1 million Americans, and I shared that statistic, will either get a subsidy or get free health insurance. 12.1 million people. Now, who will be paying for that? The rest are paying for that. Now, are there some legitimate needs? Without a doubt, there's some legitimate needs. But when we do that, those unintended consequences we have, we need to make sure that it's fair to everybody. And I believe that we can cover some of those. We'll disagree on this particular thing. I can tell I'm not changing your mind. And
no, but I appreciate the opportunity to bring this.
Well, and I appreciate you, and I hope that most people, in fact, everyone who's come to my office, whether it's one of our district offices, by the way, our district office here in Franklin is here at the courthouse. We have a district office in all 17 counties so that you don't have to drive. So if you're a senior citizen, you can go in and get help there in all 17 counties, plus on the eastern tribal lands of the Cherokee Indian Reservation, which is the first in the nation. You know, and so I'm looking for ways. My business was customer service. I'm looking for ways to serve you better, and that's what I'm going to do. But I appreciate you sharing.
Mark, just take one more.
Okay, one more, right here.
What, if anything, can Congress do about the president's regulations?
Executive orders. All right. Really, you know, when it gets down to it, we can be a whole lot more specific in the legislation that we pass. One of the problems that we have is that when we are not specific in what we think is the best thing, we do this. We pass a bill that has great intentions that says we will leave it up to the agency to figure out how to implement it. It is a real problem that I see that we have got to really get to the bottom of. It will slow down the process. There will be fewer laws that get passed. But it is. But we need to make sure that Congress keeps its role, the President keeps his role, and the judiciary keeps its role, and that they don't overlap. And we need to make sure. You need to have your voice. When you see that those lines are being blurred, light up the phones, because let me tell you, when you call, people will listen. Now, it has to be a whole large volume, but if you'll call, they will listen. Thank you so much. God bless you. It's been a privilege to be here.